Well, good morning, everybody. If you're visiting with us this morning, welcome. My name is Andrew. I'm the associate pastor here at Brightview Church. Our lead pastor, Chris, is en route back here from Toronto. We had a meeting this weekend in Toronto, and he's on his way back right now. So he asked me to preach, which is great. So I have to first clarify something, though, because we made a slight mistake in the preaching plan here. With Advent and everything, Chris didn't want me to go off and do my own thing, but to stay on series and stay on target and all that. And so he asked me to preach on the first Sunday of Advent and to continue in the stewardship series, to steward sort of the theme of Advent. And so we've got 4 themes that come up in Advent, right? There's hope, peace, joy, and love. And so each week we're going to be looking at stewarding hope, peace, joy, and love. And normally you go in that order: hope, peace, joy, and love. However, neither Chris or I thought about that when we were looking at the series. And he said, can you preach the first Sunday of Advent? The topic is peace. I said, okay, peace is great. I love talking about peace, Andrew talks about shalom lots. Anyways, which I'm going to this morning. So get ready for that. And then a week after we'd had that discussion and I'd already been prepping my sermon, he goes, oh, I think you're supposed to actually do hope, not peace. And I was like, okay, I'm already kind of been prepping. And he went, well, which one do you want to do then? I think we can go out of order. And I said, well, I'm already halfway into my sermon prep for peace. So if I can just keep going that way. And he said, okay, so we're out of order. I apologize. We're doing peace this week and hope next week. And so you'll have to just be patient with us, have lots of forgiveness for us, because we went out of order. So peace. This morning we're talking about stewarding peace, about, then I put in my subtitle because I got to have shalom in there somewhere. So it's the shalom of Christ, the peace of Christ. In John chapter 14, verse 27, Jesus gives his disciples the gift of peace. He says, peace I leave with you, my peace I give to you. I do not give to you as the world gives, and do not let your heart be troubled or fearful. He gives his peace as a gift, something for the disciples to carry and bear. Interesting that we start today with peace as we head into probably one of the highest stress and anxiety-inducing seasons of our year in North America, into a time in which people feel pressure and expectation more than most other times of year. We're in a world where 18% of our population deals with anxiety, actual anxiety disorders. As far as the rest of us just feeling anxiety, I think I could say the number's a lot higher. Stress seems to affect everybody, and with enough stress, it can really start to shut you down. In fact, there's a hormone in your body called cortisol, and when you get stressed, that hormone fires through your body, and it's been attached to things like heart disease and stuff like that. So memory loss is attached to it as well. So stress, it breaks us down. We're a culture that struggles to find peace. We're a people who are nervous or anxious or lonely, or we're ruled by our fears, and we are a people who struggle to find peace. And a lot of our culture is trying to find peace. A lot of people are trying to find peace and struggling to find it. We go through life rarely experiencing moments of peace, and we'll try to find any one of those small moments of calm or feelings of certainty that we might be able to grasp onto and feel that peace for just a moment before we have to go back into the tumult and chaos of our world. And yet the promise here in John 14 is that God grants peace. That not just God, actually, specifically Jesus gives peace, his peace. So what is this peace? And how can we come to experience it? Peace in the Bible is one of the major themes of the entire biblical text. So now we get to get into my favorite theology to talk about. Because in the very beginning, God created. And When we look at what God created, we often think of the first thing God gave to humanity was the garden that they lived in, and maybe the purpose for their life, which was to tend the garden. But I would argue that those aren't the first things that God gave them. A philosopher I really enjoy reading occasionally is Peter Kreeft. And he wrote that the first thing God gave to his creation was purpose. And when we find ourselves without meaning or without purpose in life, we find ourselves kind of living in hell. And I agree with his philosophy on this, though I wonder a little bit if the first gift God actually gave us was not just purpose, but his first gift he gave us was actually himself, his breath, his presence, his communion with him. The Hebrew word shalom means peace, is how we translate it, but it actually refers to a deeper sense of whole and complete relationship. It refers to being in communion with someone. And so when God enters into the creative process of making Adam and Eve, and he forms him out of dust, he breathes life into the man, and then he raises the man up, teaches him and educates him, shows him the garden, teaches him the law of the garden, which is eat whatever you want except for that one thing. And he spends time with the man in communion with Adam. And he sees it is not good for Adam to be alone. Why? Because he had made Adam to be a relational being, a person who was designed to be in relationship both with God, but with another of his own kind. And so God forms for him a woman, and the two become an embodiment of shalom as well, a further deepening of relationship. And so humanity was made to be in communion, in relationship with one another and with the God of the universe. The Hebrew word for that is shalom. And so, let's see if this thing works. I never use this. It's not working. Can you flip the slide for me? It's not working. I'm not sure why. Okay. Shalom. Maybe some of you have seen some hoodies or t-shirts with that triangle thing on there. This is like the thing I teach over and over, and all the young adults and teenagers are sick of it. But they shouldn't be, because it's the best theology ever. God created us to be people of relationship. He designed us for whole, healthy, and complete relationship with one another. This is biblical peace. It's not simply a lack of conflict. It is a depth of relationship. It's communion with one another and with the God of the universe. This was God's intention for his creation. This is what God designed us for. This is what God intended for us from the beginning. However, it didn't stay this way, as we all know. It doesn't take much effort to look in our world and see that shalom was broken. You see, in Genesis chapter 3, we have the breaking of shalom, and it starts to break down. You want to just hit a couple of arrows. Just hit the arrows. There we go. Look at that. I have animations. Keep going. Yeah, beautiful. So what happens here, if I could click it, I would do it as I spoke, but this is perfect. So what happens here is Adam and Eve are walking in the garden, and they see the tree they're not supposed to eat from, but there's a serpent there, and it says, hey, you should come eat this fruit. And they're like, no, we probably shouldn't. He's like, no, but it'll make you like God. They're like, hey, that sounds pretty good. We're in. We could be like God. You see, what they did here was Adam and Eve heard the temptation. We could be like God, and they saw, well, instead of just being with God, we could become our own God. What a great opportunity. And so they rejected communion with God in pursuit of becoming like God. They set aside what God had designed for them and sought a design of their own intrigue, their own purpose, their own control. And so they rejected the communion that God had designed for them. And they sought instead to become their own gods, to become like God. And so they ate the fruit. And in doing so, they disobey God and they break relationship with him. And the communion with God is broken. But God comes into the garden and he seeks them out. I tell a story sometimes at youth group on this one about, your children playing hide and seek with you, and they tell you where they're going to hide. I don't know if you ever had that, but my kids, they're little. Okay, Dad, we're going to play hide and seek. You count. I'm going to hide there, and she's going to hide there, and then you come find us. Like, okay, I know exactly where you are. Or the other good one is they'll go, okay, we're playing hide and seek, and they'll go hide, and one of them's hiding under the table. But I don't know if you guys have been to my house. Some of you have. My table's about this tall. So if they hide under our table, they're pretty much just visible. I could just stand there and just see them. And one of them's hiding behind a curtain, and the curtain is, moving and whatever else. And so you know where they are. And yet, as a parent, what do? Oh, I wonder where they could be. They're probably not on top of the table. Maybe they're under a chair, and they're sitting there giggling away and laughing. Okay, that's fun for them. I kind of wonder sometimes, though, if God walks through the garden, he knows where Adam and Eve is, but he goes, where are you guys at? I wonder where they are. Maybe they're behind this tree. Okay, maybe not that silly, but God was giving them a chance to reveal their hiding place to him, to come out and say, we messed up, here we are. And so he comes through the garden asking, where are you? Like a father seeking his children. And so they step out and he says, what have you done? And Adam, in a show of male brilliance, says, the woman that you gave me some fruit, so I ate it. So, it's not my fault. So, and then from that time forward, men have blamed everyone and everything else for their problems. And so in that, Adam breaks relationship and communion with his wife. He breaks relationship and communion with his God. He blames them both for his own failing. It says right in the text, he was standing right there hearing the serpent speak to his wife. He knew what the fruit of the tree was. It wasn't like she was like, hey, I found this new fruit in the garden somewhere on a different tree. Here you go. No, he was standing right there. He saw her pick it off the tree that he wasn't supposed to eat from. He knew what he was doing. It even says in 1 Timothy chapter 2 that Eve was deceived by the serpent, but Adam, fully knowing what he was doing, ate the fruit. So, okay, that was my little rant on Adam eats the fruit, and he breaks the relationship with God and with the woman. The woman is asked, what did you do? And she says, well, the serpent told me that this fruit wouldn't kill me, so I ate it. And so relationship is broken again between God and woman and creation. And basically the whole thing falls apart. God designed us to be in this whole and complete and healthy relationship with God and with creation and with himself, with one another. That's not what we experience today. It's not at all what we experience today. It wouldn't take much. I could probably ask the question. We've done this in youth group before. I asked the question, I just say, what are some ways in which you've seen shalom broken in our world today? And then you can shout out answers. Actually, let's do that. Just shout out a couple answers to me, and you guys switch the slides for me. Shout out a couple answers. How do we see broken shalom today? War. Divorce. Sorry? Bullying. Yeah, so those are the three I took pictures of up there. Was because those are the first three that came to my mind, right? Like they're obvious. War, divorce, bullying. Are there any others? Natural disasters? Abortions? Betrayal? Yep. Is that like God made apples and they were good, and so Satan made tomatoes? It is a fruit. That's it. It's a tomato. All right. Well, that's the last time we do call and response shout outs. All right. Ran that experiment. Chris doesn't have to try that out now. It doesn't take much to glance around and see brokenness of relationship in our world, in our own personal lives. How many of us have lost friends or lost people we cared about? The relationships have broken, whether we've grown apart over time or whether there was a conflict that separated us. Wars rage around our world constantly. There's always someone at war, it seems. Divorce is in 2022 in Canada, 40% of marriages ended in divorce. In 2022, 40%. That's the current, or 2022, that's the most current numbers we have for our divorce rate in North America, or in Canada. 40% of marriages will end in divorce. If you live together before marriage, you increase your chance by an additional 40%. Relationships are broken. Divorce is common. And we have all sorts of bullying, conflicts, ridicule, disrespect, mistrust. We don't live in a world or a culture that has a whole lot of peace, a whole lot of whole, complete, and healthy relationships. This was the world after the fall. This is Genesis 3. We have the fall, and following that, we have a hopeless world full of conflict and brokenness. The next story in the Bible, Genesis 4, is Cain killing a quarter of the population of the earth, right? When he slays his brother. Why? Because he's angry at God. So he kills his brother. Shortly after that, we have the world becoming so broken, so corrupt, so lacking in shalom that God decides to flood the earth. Soon after that, we have a story of humanity trying to become equal with God, and so God has to scatter them and change their languages. We have this hopeless world that we live in. No matter how much humanity strives, shalom cannot be restored. We've broken it. We rejected communion with God. We denied our communion with our spouse or with our loved ones. We have broken shalom. And in Genesis 3, humanity went on a downward spiral that will not pull up under our own power and our own strength. We cannot fix it. The first step in Freedom Session, which is a program we run here at Brightview, one of the first parts of the first step is we recognize that our lives have become unmanageable. Because under our own strength, we just can't do it. And this is the problem that began in Genesis 3. Shalom was broken and humanity became unmanageable. Shalom became impossible. Communion with God was no longer there because we'd rejected the God who made us. But despite this hopelessness, God did not stop. God did not abandon humanity. Humanity abandoned God, rejected God, tried to become its own God, but God does not give up on humanity. And so God calls. He calls Abram. And he makes a covenant with Abram. He has a chosen people that he forms into a kingdom. And from that chosen people, he gives them a land and a place on the earth that his name might be made known through his people. That God would still be able to commune, that they could meet in a tent of meeting or on the top of a mountain, that they could have relationship with God. Now, there was always a barrier, right? In the Holy of Holies, there was a great curtain that separated the people from God's holiness because they were still rejecting God's relationship, still rejecting God's presence. They were still not in shalom with God, but God was at least trying to enter to humanity. God did not give up. And through the prophets in Isaiah chapter 9, verse 6, God promises a prince of peace, one who is the prince of relationship, of shalom, one who would bring shalom into the world again. The one who will restore wholeness and relationship. And that's what we celebrate this holiday season. That's what we celebrate when we head into Christmas, is the coming of this Prince of Peace. We celebrate the birth of the Christ, the Messiah, the promised one. And with him, he brought what we call the shalom of Christ, the peace of Christ. It's a new reality. Jesus enters into our world and he examples a radically righteous life, a radical way of living, a life of relationship with the Father. He examples wholeness and connection with God in a way that humanity had not experienced since creation. Christ spent time with the Father, in tune with his mission. Jesus embodied shalom in the way that he interacted with the Trinity. And the Father traveled with him on earth. Jesus treated people differently throughout his time on earth. When people met Jesus, things were different. One of my favorite stories is the story of Zacchaeus. Because Jesus meets with this guy, Zacchaeus, and and they go for lunch, right? And Zacchaeus is kind of this corrupt, selfish man and hated. And yet they go for lunch, and we don't know what happens over lunch in terms of the conversation. We don't know what Jesus says or does. We don't know the level of commitment he provides or whatever it is he does there. We don't know if he convicts or cares for or meets a need for Zacchaeus. We don't know. All we know is they had lunch together. At the end of that lunch, Zacchaeus' life is flipped upside down, and he gives back 4 times what he stole from people. He repents fully of his wrong way of doing, and he seeks to restore relationship with those he had wronged. Meeting Jesus is life-changing. I was in a small group of students a couple weeks ago at youth night, and we were talking about unconditional love, that we care about people without any expectation or work on their part to earn that care. And I was talking about God doing that. And I said, because God can do that for us, we can do that for others. And this girl in the room kind of gives a snort. Yeah, right. And I looked at her and I said, doesn't matter who you are, what you've been through, or what you've done. Do you know that I care that you're here? That you're loved and that I love you? And that these other youth leaders who are sitting here also love you? And she kind of at first resisted it, wanted to deny it. She's like, I don't know how that's possible because that's not really true, is it? She said that. That's not really true. Just like that too. It's like that. Not really. Anyways, as teenage girls do. And it wasn't Sophie, but you get it, Sophie, right? Really. It wasn't Sophie who was doing that, but she gets it. Okay. And I looked at her and I said, no, it really is. I said, no, it really is true that we can genuinely care about you. And the reason we can do that is because God genuinely cares about me. Like, because God loves me unconditionally, God loves me just because of who I am, just because he made me and he loves me and he's looked at me and he's gone, oh, that guy's a goof, but I like him. And I'll take care of him and I'll be there for him. Because he can love me and all my warts and all my problems, I can love you. Despite who you are and what you've been through. And I think for the first time ever, that girl was quiet for a solid 10 minutes as she pondered what that meant and the small breakthrough we had in that moment. When Jesus met with people, it changed their lives. It was transformative. He entered into relationship in a different way. And then Jesus went to the cross. And he did something so necessary. See, I skipped a piece in Genesis kind of quickly. But you see, in Genesis, God said, if you eat the fruit on that day, you die. But Adam and Eve, though they experienced a separation, which could be a definition for death, they experienced a separation from God, and certainly a spiritual death happened there. They did not physically die, yet God had every right to strike them dead in that moment. God had every right to remove humanity from the face of the earth and go, well, that didn't work out. They're done. That would have been justice. That would have been righteous. And yet God spares Adam and Eve. Yes, he exiles them from the garden, but he does not cease meeting with them. Yes, he exiles them from the garden, but he does not kill them. Yes, life got a whole lot harder, and yet God remained faithful. But before they ate the fruit, God had already declared what the cost would be if they ate it. The cost is death. But humanity was spared the cost. They were spared paying that price that day. But the price remained as a debt unpaid. In order for shalom to be restored, the debt had to be paid. The relationship was broken by the wrongdoing, and the wrongdoing needed to be made right. But God spared humanity the need to be the one who paid the cost. Because in Jesus, when he goes to the cross, Jesus pays the debt. His death is the death that Adam and Eve should have died. His death is the death that any one of us should have died. In taking on the consequence of the broken shalom, Jesus makes possible relationship with God once again. Jesus tears the curtain. He removes the veil and removes the barriers and makes possible relationship with himself. and with the God of the universe once again. We are once again ushered into communion with God, into shalom with the God of the universe. And through the shalom of Christ, a once hopeless reality becomes hopeful again. There's a new reality now. We can be in relationship with God, and God can be in relationship with us. We can be his people, and he can be our God. We no longer have to be ruled by our fears, our anxieties, our stresses. We can trust and know that God is with us and that we are not alone. So Christ has given us his shalom. John 14:27, my peace I leave with you, my peace I give to you. I do not give to you as the world gives. Do not let your heart be troubled or fearful. My shalom I give to you. He gives us his peace. So what are we supposed to do with it? This series that Chris has been going through is a series on stewardship. Stewardship is the idea that everything belongs to God, right? Psalm 24, the earth and everything in it belongs to God. Our role then is not to take for ourselves, but to receive what God has made for us and to care for it, to steward it. The role of a steward is to safeguard the things of the king. That is what a steward does. Safeguard the things of the king until such time as the king returns. That's the entire story, by the way, of the return of the king, the third book in the Lord of the Rings series. Okay? It's the entire, pretty much the whole arc that goes on there in Gondor. Denethor is not the king of Gondor. He's the steward of Gondor, right? He's just taking care of it until a king returns. Until a guy comes back with a reforged sword and of the bloodline of the kings. Aragorn, son of Arathorn. Okay. Everyone's on the same page now? Yeah, okay. So then the question is, if we've been given the shalom of Christ to steward, he's given it to us, well, what does that look like for us to steward the shalom of Christ today? What does it look like for us to safeguard it, to care for it, and to represent it in our world until the king returns? Well, I think there's probably a lot of ways I could go on this theologically, but I think we'd live differently, that we begin to live a life of shalom. In Ephesians chapter 6, verses 10 to 18, you'll find the armor of God. And in the armor of God, there's a whole bunch of pieces, right? There's a belt of truth, sword of the Spirit, breastplate of righteousness, shield of faith. And you could do a whole sermon series on those. I've done that actually before. And so you could go into each one. And the shoes in the armor of God are the shoes of peace. And I actually think that's quite interesting. Because shoes are the thing that wherever you go, they go. And after you leave a place, your shoes leave behind a footprint. And so the shoes of shalom, the shoes of peace, seem an interesting piece of armor to me. Where we walk, we bring shalom. And when we leave that place, we leave behind us shalom. Wherever we go, whatever we do, we wear the shoes of peace and we leave behind us the footprints of peace. This might look different for different people. Maybe it looks like in your day-to-day, wherever you go, you're not worried about your finances. Or you're not worried about your schedule because God is in control of these things. It might mean that you're not fretting about a test or an upcoming meeting or a review because God is with you. This past couple of weeks, I've kind of come to a self-realization a bit that, and I mean, it's not a new realization, but just becoming more real for me, is remembering that for me, maybe being in shalom and in peace and walking in peace is to know that God is at work in this community and in the lives of young people, and that it's not all on me. In fact, very little is on me. I find that difficult. I shared with someone the other day that I see hurt and brokenness in churches all the time. There's hurt and brokenness in this church. There's hurt and brokenness in a lot of churches. I've seen many times where in youth groups, the youth pastor, through whether ignorance or neglect or just he's human, fails to see a need of a student or fails to protect a student from harm. And I look at those things and I go, not on my watch. I'm not going to let that happen under my oversight. And then you run a youth group or you go to a church and you find out you just can't control all those things. And so for me, part of wearing the shoes of peace and walking in the shalom of Christ is recognizing that I don't control all the things of the church or the youth group, though sometimes I might try. But ultimately, they're God's. And so being in shalom with God is to trust that in relationship with God, that God is actually in relationship with me, but he's also seeking and in relationship with you. And that he is restoring shalom in your life. And that it is not my job to make that happen in every person's life. It is my job to represent God in some regard and the shalom that he and I share, that you might also see it and seek it. I don't think it's my job to force you into relationship with Jesus. It's also not my job to worry every day whether or not people are being cared for. How do I put this well? It is my job to care for people. It is not my job to be consumed with worry about it. I need to trust that God is at work in meeting people's heart need and care. And that when he places me in situations to care for somebody, that is God at work to care for those people. I need to worry about the ones he brings to me or that he puts me in front of, rather than worrying about all the people I can't get to. That for me is walking in shalom. I don't know what it looks like for you. Is it trusting that God is raising your children? That God is present in your home? Is it trusting God in your workplace? Is it trusting God when you're driving somewhere? What does it look like to walk every day in relationship with Jesus? In the shalom of Christ, wherever you go, wearing the shoes of peace. It's letting go of trying to be God, which was the temptation Adam and Eve gave into, and trusting God to be God. It's letting go of trying to be my own God and learning to enter into a trusting relationship with the God of the universe. In this, we discover the shalom of Christ, a peace that passes understanding because it takes out of my hands the need to accomplish everything. The need to be the one always doing, to earning the relationship with God, to earning success in the world. It takes all of that out of my hands and it says, actually, I'm just going to trust God. And I'm going to go where he leads. And I'm going to do as he directs. And in relationship with Christ, I will enter into this world and enter into spaces with peace. And as I leave, I'll leave peace behind me. Where do we walk each day? And is God walking with you? Do others see a difference in your life? Do they see the shalom of Christ, the relationship you have with the God of the universe, in the way that you walk, talk, live, interact? When people encountered Jesus, their lives were changed. When people encounter you, are they changed by the shalom of Christ that he's given you? We're to steward that relationship. We're to carry that relationship with us wherever we go, safeguard it, and allow the world to see it. Gondor was a huge, bright, white city. It was known for its 7 walls, and they were white. The world knew Gondor as a place of refuge, of power, of strength. And that was stewarded in the world, that the world would see it. As we carry the shalom of Christ, as we steward the shalom of Christ, do people see it in your life? Do they see that that is a place of refuge? That Christ has given you certainty, calm, assurance, Do they see in you a peace that passes understanding? God has given you his shalom. He's given himself in relationship with you. He took the death that we deserved. He took the death that was the cost of broken shalom. And in doing so, he restored relationship with us. Relationship with God today is possible. Some call this an over-realized eschatology. That's the fancy theology term for what I'm talking about here. Over-realized in that we believe that in eternity we will have perfect relationship with God and with others once again. Shalom will be fully restored in eternity. But today we still see a broken world around us. But the over-realized part is saying, but we could have that shalom of eternity. We could have that today. That it's possible, not through my own strength, but through the shalom of Christ. That God has made possible that we be in relationship with him today. That's the gospel. That's the work of Jesus. That is what was presented. That in his death, the veil was torn, the wall was broken, and relationship with God is possible once again. So you can know you are not alone. You don't have to face the world on your own. That the things that we allow to consume us, the fears and the anxieties, we can learn that God has them under control. He is a good God. He cares for us. He loves us. When we did not deserve him, he was there for us. When we did not deserve it, he died for us. Have you entered into the shalom of Christ? Have you entered into a relationship with the God of the universe? It is possible again, and we can live a new way because of it. Let me pray, and music team can come back. Lord God, we thank you that you sent your Son into the world. As we celebrate this month, his arrival, let us not lose sight of what it stands for, what it means. That you sent the Prince of Peace, the one who would restore shalom into this world. And so, Lord, we seek this morning to become bearers of shalom, to become stewards of your relationship, that we might actually experience real relationship with you in this life and could spread that to those around us, that they might experience a whole new way of living, a whole new way of caring. God, be with us as we go. Help us to tie on the shoes of peace with courage and confidence that you walk with us and that you've gone already ahead of us and prepared opportunities for us to represent you in this world. We praise in your name.